revealed, Trump could owe $400 million in New York back taxes and penalties if state finds his family used Dodges for decades. President Donald Trump's back New York state tax bill could top $400 million if allegations that his father Fred Trump used shady tax Dodges are true, an expert has estimated. Tax officials in New York State and City said they are probing the allegations in a Tuesday New York Times story that said Trump received at least $413 million from his father over the decades, much through dubious tax maneuvers. The tax department is reviewing the allegations in the NIT article and is vigorously pursuing all appropriate avenues of investigation, a spokesman from the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance said in a statement to CNBC. New York Attorney General Barbara Underwood, a Democrat, has declined to comment on the matter, though New York Mayor Bill de Blasio issued a forceful warning that the city, which collects its own income tax, would aggressively pursue any back taxes. After reviewing the Times article, Fred Slater, a CPA who has advised real estate professionals for more than 40 years, told Crain's that he estimates Trump and his siblings could owe New York State more than $400 million in unpaid taxes, interest and penalties. State law would allow tax officials to seek civil penalties if they can show someone intentionally sought to evade taxes, even decades ago. Those who lose such cases are often required to pay their back taxes along with penalties. At the federal level, tax law experts expressed skepticism that the IRS would mount any civil investigation. The main reason, they said, is that the Times account says IRS officials have already conducted extensive audits of the estate left by Trump's parents. Earlier on Wednesday, de Blasio, a Democrat, warned Trump that the city will squeeze him for back taxes he might owe on money and other assets he got from his father. The city of New York is looking to recoup any money that Donald Trump owes the people of New York City, period, he said during a press conference. De Blasio claimed a Good Old Boy network decades ago had allowed Fred Trump to minimize his tax bill and enabled his son to take advantage of the sleight of hand without being held accountable. If a lot of people had done their jobs, he would never have been president of the United States, said de Blasio, a liberal Democrat. He claimed the president played the Empire State's political game like a fiddle to escape the kind of regulation and investigation and prosecution he should have received many times over. De Blasio also suggested that his city government and the state government in Albany could retroactively levy very serious fines, and that in some cases criminal prosecutions could result. There are real ramifications right now to what has been disclosed, he said, either with potential violations of law, or in cases where the statute of limitations has ended that there may be very serious civil penalties. The White House had said earlier in the day that despite Tuesday's lengthy and embarrassing expose about the Trump family's allegedly illegal tax avoidance schemes, the president has no plan to release his personal income tax returns in order to rebut the news. The 14,000-word Times story WSA a deep dive exercise in following the billionaire's money, based largely on tracing the wealth Trump absorbed from his tenacious real estate developer father, Fred. Most of the trove of documents the Times obtained through unknown channels are date back decades. But White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders told reporters that the release of tax returns, even from the late 1990s and early 2000s, is not under discussion. I know that a number of his taxes are still under audit, Sanders said. Trump has long cited seemingly interminable audits as a rationale for maintaining his privacy, claiming that handing them over while they're still subject to change would be legally inadvisable. Asked directly if the White House would provide any of them to the press, Sanders replied, "I'm not aware of any plans to do so." Sanders declined to rebut any specific facts cited in the Times story despite calling it totally false and recycled. She did, however, quote Fred Trump as saying of his son that everything he touched turns to gold. The Times reported Tuesday that the elder Trump made his vast wealth accumulation possible by steering resources into his son's hands through a variety of dubious dodges including vastly undervaluing real estate values, obscuring gifts, and avoiding taxes entirely. Fred Trump's own tax returns show countless efforts to enrich the future president and set him up to be the successful businessman and public figure that he became. Many of the transfers were made in secret, often in financially advantageous ways that saved Trump and his siblings hundreds of millions of dollars. according to the deeply reported analysis. In eye-popping detail it lays bare what it says were years of tax avoidance which it calls dubious tax schemes, including instances of outright fraud. Within minutes of its publication, New York state tax authorities said they would investigate. The cache of paperwork included secret tax and bank documents whose leak will likely launch an intense security and loyalty breach investigation inside Trump world, and will be fodder to Democrats demanding Trump meet with precedent and make his tax returns public. They paint a picture of vast wealth matched by equally questionable accounting, all for the benefit of Fred Trump and his family. Donald Trump and his siblings. One Fred Trump tax return showed, claimed 25 apartment complexes with 6,988 apartments were worth only $41 million. Less than a decade later, in 2004, banks valued them at $900 million. Trump was able to bank a total of $413 million from his father's empire partly through those tax dodges. At the tender age of 3, Trump was earning $200,000 a year in 2018 from his dad's business empire, becoming a millionaire by age 8, according to the report. By the time he graduated college, the Wharton School of Finance, as Trump likes to point out, he was getting $1 million a year in today's dollars, an amount that would jump to $5 million a year by the time he hit his 40s. The transfers and undervaluations had the effect of allowing the Trump children to avoid potential gift taxes, and also estate taxes, based on the asset's full value. Responded Trump lawyer Charles Harder, should the Times state or imply that President Trump participated in fraud, tax evasion or any other crime, it will be exposing itself to substantial liability and damages for defamation. Harder distanced Trump and pointed the finger at lawyers and accountants. President Trump had virtually no involvement whatsoever with these matters. The affairs were handled by other Trump family members who were not experts themselves and therefore relied entirely upon the aforementioned licensed professionals to ensure full compliance with the law. As the story exploded across the airwaves and the internet, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders attacked the story and complained that the paper can rarely find anything positive to say about Trump, but did not seek to rebut specific allegations such as the avoidance of hundreds of millions in gift taxes. Fred Trump has been gone for nearly 20 years and it's sad to witness this misleading attack against the Trump family by the failing New York Times. Many decades ago the IRS reviewed and signed off on these transactions, she said. The New York Times and other media outlets' credibility with the American people is at an all-time low because they are consumed with attacking the president and his family 24/7 instead of reporting the news, she said. The truth is the market is at an all-time high. Unemployment is at a 50-year low, taxes for families and businesses have been cut, wages are up, farmers and workers are empowered from better trade deals, and America's military is stronger than ever. Yet the New York Times can rarely find anything positive about the president and his tremendous record of success to report. Perhaps another apology from the New York Times, like the one they had to issue after they got the 2016 election so embarrassingly wrong, is in order, she concluded. Trump has not released his personal tax returns, despite repeated calls by rivals for him to do so during the campaign, as has been the tradition for nominees going back decades. He signed into law a tax cut that doubled the estate tax exemption to $10 million and indexed it to inflation. Trump tried to make himself his father's only executor, and sister said it smelled. When big projects went bust, Trump used his father's empire to secure loans to sustain his business. In 1990, he used the East Orange Senior high-rise to get a $65 million loan. At a time when he was facing down creditors, Trump also took steps to modify his father's will by presenting him with a codicil that would have strengthened his hand as sole executor of Fred Trump's estate. It also protected Donald Trump's inheritance from creditors and his looming divorce from Ivana Trump, according to the Times. But Fred Trump chafed at his son's presentation, which included no advance consultation, and was prepared with Trump's own lawyers. Marianne Trump Berry, Trump's sister, described her father's reaction in a deposition. "This doesn't pass the smell test," she says he told her. Berry, a federal judge, added, "Donald was in precarious financial straits by his own admission, And Dad was very concerned as a man who worked hard for his money and never wanted any of it to leave the family. How family reworked Fred Trump's will, and Times calls methods legally dubious. Eventually, Trump heirs, including Donald, along with Fred Trump, worked to rewrite Fred Trump's will with an eye toward avoiding steep taxes. According to the Times, they relied on methods that were legally dubious and, in some cases, appeared to be fraudulent, a term Trump's lawyer denied. The investigation focuses on All County Building Supply and Maintenance, a Trump company incorporated in 1992. The setup allowed Fred Trump to make gifts to his children that were made to look like business transactions, thereby avoiding the 55% estate tax at the time. The company spent millions on equipment to maintain Fred Trump's sprawling empire of apartment complexes. Invoices got padded, and Trump's children split the profits. Sometimes invoices were marked up as much as 50%. Robert Trump took a $500,000 salary, but the Trump nephew, John Walter, generated the invoices. Thousands of pages of documents reviewed by the paper showed that Fred Trump's costs went up once the company was on the scene. Walter was once asked during a deposition why Fred Trump didn't make himself an owner. He said because he would have to pay a death tax on it. He said the company also used padded invoices as a way to justify rent increases with regulators, passing them on to tenants based on false costs of doing business. The higher the markup would be, the higher the rent that might be charged, Robert Trump said. Fred Trump began transferring the bulk of his empire to his kids at the age of 90 using a trust vehicle known as a GRIT. Assets were split between Fred and Mary Trump, who shifted 2/3 of assets to the children, who then paid the balance by making annuity payments. The ownership was nearly free and clear 3 years later. By 1997, lowball valuations saved hundreds of millions in Fred Trump's tax and President took part. Trump avoided hundreds of millions in taxes through lowball evaluations, according to the report. Donald Trump participated in the sessions where the plans were conceived. An appraisal by Robert Von Enken put the empire's value at $94 million. But buildings in the same neighborhood sold for considerably more than Van Enken said Trump's properties were worth. In one appraisal that appears to defy normal New York real estate logic, Von Enken assessed the value of 886 Trump Village apartments on Coney Island as being worth negative $5.9 million. But local tax assessors valued them at $38 million, and in 2004, when the real estate market had risen, they were valued at $107 million by a bank. The Trump family effectively took a write-down in the valuation for the empire by ascribing Fred Trump a minority ownership to a firm that by the examination of the books he did own. By dividing firms into minority shares and claiming other write-downs, an empire that would later go for $900 million got a value for tax purposes of $41.4 million. Fred Trump died with just $1.9 million to his name despite massive family wealth. The IRS appears to have fought back against the valuations on a 1995 gift tax return, but managed to claw back only an additional $5 million in value. Fred Trump's final estate tax return showed he had just $1.9 million, a tiny fraction of the wealth he accumulated over a lifetime. The story mentions a family meeting after Fred Trump's death where Trump was accompanied by Trump Organization executive Allen Weisselberg. Weisselberg reportedly got a limited immunity deal from prosecutors in connection to Michael Cohen's guilty plea on tax and campaign finance violations. Trump has repeatedly referenced an initial $1 million loan as part of his personal business origin story, but the Times found Fred Trump loaned his son a collective $61 million.